Good morning. This is your professor, Sal Harlan. It is October the 5th. It's 8 o'clock. What I'm going to do for this part of the lecture is that I'm going to discuss the paper structure and components of assignment number 2. And this is based on a few questions that I've gotten from students as to which of the assignment number 2, what is the structure of assignment number 2. And it's also based on what I received for assignment number 1. So the first 20 or 30 minutes of the lecture, maybe less, I will discuss that. And I, as always, for the past several weeks, what I've done is that I am recording the audio, which I will post. I am also recording the video of the lecture. So the first part of today's lecture will be going over assignment number 2, the structure anyway. All of the indices that are required from the assignment number 2, you have in lecture number 5 or 6. And again, I'm going to say that you have 2 options for assignment number 2. You can just look at the revenue diversity and expenditure diversity based on the Simpson diversity indices that are calculated. And I believe that was lecture number 3. You can conduct the financial, only the financial condition, looking at the liquidity, the net profit margin, profitability, human capital productivity with respect to revenue attainment. And that is just a financial condition indices, so you can do that for assignment number 2. Or the third option is you can combine revenue diversity, expenditure diversity with the financial condition indicators. And again, so you have 3 options. To get a full view of the financial condition of the organization, you should do revenue and expenditure diversity plus the positive fiscal key indicators, which again are the net profit margin, liquidity, debt burden, if it's calculated to that, the human capital, human resources, productivity, return on assets, return on human capital. Those always are good to calculate all together to provide a comprehensive view of the financial condition of the organization. As you can see on the screen, I have the paper structure and components for assignment number 2, and this is based on questions that I've gotten over the past week or so as to what should be included in the paper. So the paper structure is the following. You need the NSU cover sheet indicating that it's your work. Some assignments that I received did not have that, so I need that. There needs to be an executive summary / memo. For those of you who never wrote an executive summary or memo, it's you have the 2, which is going to be me, or the executive director of the nonprofit that you selected. It's 2 with the title of the person, the organization, or the title, person's name and the title. From, and that's going to be you. The date, obviously, and then the subject matter. In this case, is going to be the subject line, or the regarding is going to be the financial condition of the nonprofit you are looking at. Then comes the report with the cover letter, the title of the report, your name, the person that is going to, so it should be the title, the person is going to, your name, and the date. That's the cover sheet for all reports. Then comes the actual report. The first page of the report having the title and the introduction and all the other components. So on slide number 3, as you can tell from the video and also from the audio, assignment number 3 covers, page number 3 has the executive summary. The first part of the executive summary is the introduction, and that briefly covers why you conducted a financial analysis. Again, financial analyses are conducted to assess the fiscal health of an organization, to see how well it's performing, whether it's increasing revenue or revenue is stable, whether it's controlling its expenditures. We're also assessing whether or not assets are being used to generate revenue. We're also conducting the financial analysis to assess the productivity of the human capital, human resources. You're looking at return on investment. You're looking at return on investment of human capital. You're looking at its liquidity. What does, if all of its liabilities were to be paid at once, does it have the sufficient assets to convert to cash to pay off the liabilities? And that's why the financial condition or financial analysis is being conducted. Just briefly state that. The second heading is the problem statement. So what is the fiscal issue or fiscal issues being addressed? Does the organization have financial issues where revenue are decreasing or expenditures are increasing, and what does that mean for the organization's fiscal health? Are revenue sources being administered correctly or wisely? Are there safeguards to protect the revenue being misspent? What about expenditures? Are salary related expenditures increasing? Are they outpacing revenue increase? So briefly state what the problem is. For assignment 1, the issue was, are services being delivered effectively and efficiently by the organization? In this case, for assignment 2, the problem statement is whether or not the financial condition of the organization is increasing or decreasing. Why is the financial condition increasing or decreasing? Or is it because if its financial condition is decreasing, is that because the revenues are stable or not increasing at a rate that outpaces the expenditure increases? So briefly discuss the problem of the statement. The third aspect, the third component of the executive summary is the data and method. So you briefly discuss what you did. Where did you collect the data? So there's only 2 sources. It's the Form 990 or the audited financial reports, or a combination of the 2. How did you analyze the data? So you basically extracted the data, calculated the indices that you did. You analyzed it doing trend analysis from one year to the next. And the indices themselves are pretty self-explanatory. You put the formula. So that's briefly one paragraph or 2 paragraphs for the executive summary. The next slide discusses the findings. So you briefly discuss what you found. And some of the key questions are, is the nonprofit's financial condition good or bad? What are the root causes of the financial condition? So if the financial condition is improving, then that has to do with revenues increasing, expenditures are being controlled. The question with the revenue increases has to be addressed because that may be a short-term gain, but may present long-term consequences if that revenue items or several or one revenue item is growing extremely fast. Is that going to plateau at some time? If it does, what does that mean for the organization? What does that mean for programs and services? What are the fiscal strengths and weaknesses of the nonprofit? What does it do well with respect to revenue growth and revenue management? Does it control expenditures both on the salary side and program and services? Are there any opportunities to increase revenue or control expenditures? Does the nonprofit face any financial threats such as losing state or federal grants? So briefly discuss the findings, briefly discuss what is driving the financial condition of the organization. The next component of the executive summary after the findings are the recommendations. So you briefly discuss what the nonprofit should do to improve its fiscal condition. Should the nonprofit increase revenue, decrease expenditures, or implement a combination of the two to enhance its financial condition. Another brief discussion is what should the nonprofit do to correct its fiscal weaknesses? Does that mean it has to increase revenue? If it's going to increase revenue, what revenue can it increase relatively quickly? Does that also mean that it needs to acquire or hire grant writers or individuals that do fundraising? Does that mean that also there needs to be any type of corrective action to control expenditures? That could be scaling back the programs and services that are being offered. That could also be scaling back or streamlining processes. It could be making sure that the personnel are adequately trained, so you reduce the processing time. So there are things that can be done to decrease the fiscal weaknesses or fiscal threats by controlling expenditures on the personnel side, but also on the program and service delivery side. And if there are opportunities, then what should the nonprofit do to take advantage of opportunities that are available? Opportunities could be such things as obtaining new revenue. That could be through memberships. That could be through special events. That could be foundation grants. It could be increasing intergovernmental revenue that's federal, state, and local. So are there opportunities to enhance revenue? On the expenditure side, are there opportunities to streamline services? Are there opportunities to decrease salary-related expenditures? If so, what are they? And so these are the recommendations to improve or to enhance the financial condition of the organization. The last component of the executive summary are the next steps. And this was missing in a lot of assignments, number one. So the next steps are basically what should the nonprofit do to implement the recommendations? If you're going to make recommendations to enhance the organization, then how should the organization go about it? You can't just recommend things and then not have the option to implement them. So the organization needs to, so based on your recommendations, what is the organization going to do to make sure that those recommendations are implemented to enhance the financial condition of the organization? Of all of the recommendations, which ones are the most important and which ones should the organization implement first? If the root causes of the poor fiscal health are that expenditures are not being controlled adequately, then the first thing that the organization ought to do before it increases revenue is to control the growth of expenditures. And that can be salaries, it can be programs and services, or a combination of the two. If expenditures are increasing and revenue is stable, then you have to get the root cause of the problem corrected first. So what you do is you control the expenditures. Once you control the expenditures, then you go ahead and then go on to the next set of recommendations, and that can be to increase revenue. It can be to have better management of revenue sources, better allocation. And so those are the next steps. So once you provide the recommendation, then you have to provide a discussion on how you go about implementing the recommendations. And you do that by first discussing the primary recommendation, or discussing the primary cause of the problem and how to fix it. Obviously, it also means addressing some of the threats, addressing the opportunities that you have, and then also what other how do you best take advantage of the strengths that the organization has, and so you go ahead and if it has strengths in revenue management, revenue expenditure control, and how do you then leverage those strengths to further improve the fiscal health of the organization? So the executive summary is a brief discussion, and that is written last. So the executive summary essentially just summarizes the report. So first you write the report, and then you write the executive summary. The report structure is essentially those components that are going to be in the executive summary. So you have the introduction. In the report, you have a full discussion of why you analyze the fiscal health of the nonprofit. For the problem statement, you have a full discussion of all the financial issues that are facing the nonprofit. That's a comment that can be a combination of the lack of revenue growth. It can be also the discussion of what expenditures are not being controlled adequately. Again, that both on the human capital, human resources side, and also the program side. And also address the extent to which the client population is putting financial stress on the organization. So in other words, the financial condition of the organization may be the direct or indirect result of an increase in clientele. So the more clients that you have, the more pressure it is to expand programs and services. If there is pressure to expand programs and services, there will be pressure to increase salary-related expenditures. That is going to put a stress on the financial resources if financial resources are not increasing. So in the problem statement, you tell me what the problem is. The financial condition of the organization is stable or is decreasing. What is causing that revenue, the fiscal health to remain stable or to decrease? What is causing that? Again, that's going to be a combination of several things: salaries, programs and services, additional demands from clients. So those are considered root causes. So on the problem statement, you have to state specifically what is the problem. If the organization has a very good fiscal health in terms of revenues outpacing expenditures, and you have a good return on assets, although it's in good fiscal health, there still can be issues with respect to the fiscal health of the organization if certain aspects of the fiscal health are not being addressed. So, for example, you may have a very strong return on assets, but if your clientele is declining, then that's going to mean that there's going to be a higher cost of service and so forth. So, although you may have very good fiscal health, there are issues that are going to arise in the near future, in the long term, that are going to impact that. So you still have, although you still may have good fiscal health, there are situations or things that may decrease that fiscal health or damage the fiscal health if those issues are not being addressed. So that's part of the problem statement. The third component of the report, as I mentioned in the executive summary, is the data method. This is a full discussion of all the data, the financial reports that you examined, the 990, the audit financial reports. How many years did you look at? Are there issues with the data? Are the data as valid and reliable as you would hope? If not, then what does that mean for the fiscal analysis? So it's a full discussion of the data, it's a full discussion of how you calculated the indices. Those indices are, again, they're pretty much standardized throughout all the sectors, private, non-profit, and public. Those are the traditional indices those are indices that are traditionally used to assess fiscal health. So those you discuss. If you're looking at the revenue diversity and expenditure diversity, then we discuss the standardized and unstandardized versions of the Simpson Diversity Index. So here's a full discussion of how you analyze the data, why you used the method that you used, why did you use the data that you collected based on the 990 forms or the audited financial reports. Give me a second, we'll go make sure that the camera is actually recording the video. Okay, back to the report. On the findings, it's a full discussion of the financial condition of the nonprofit. If you're looking at it from 1 or 2 years, or the data goes back to 3 years, then you have a full discussion of the financial condition of the organization over time. So is the financial condition stable? Is it decreasing or increasing over time? Or it's sporadic? One year you may have a higher index, the next year you may be lower, and so what's driving that? Sometimes you may have anomalies in terms of revenue increases, you may have anomalies in terms of expenditure increases, and so those anomalies are going to affect the financial condition of the nonprofit from year to year. So one of the recommendations may be, and I'll get that in a second, maybe to have conduct a more thorough analysis of the financial trends of the organization. Also, if there are accounting changes, then those accounting changes are going to be reflected in the 990 form or the financial audit report. Any type of changes in the reporting structure or the accounting structure is going to may have an impact on the financial condition, because that's how those things are reported affects revenue and affects expenditures, more likely on the expenditure side. Again, it also depends on the financial condition from year to year. Is going to also depend on any lags. So if you have any type of revenue that's coming in, if there's a lag in when you receive that revenue, and revenue that may be, for example, may be collected, that maybe should have been collected last year, may be collected at the beginning of this year or reported this year, and so that's going to show an increase in the financial condition. One of the caveats, though, is that revenue from the previous year was recorded in the new year, and so what's going to happen is that you have to specify that so that in the following year, if there is a decline in revenue, it's due to the reporting of the revenue, that when the revenue was recorded by the accounting division, when it was reported in the financial reports, because if those accounting changes aren't accounted for, then you're going to have changes over the long run, and those changes are essentially due to accounting and not necessarily due to actual revenue increasing. So there are issues that you need to discuss in terms of the findings, which are going to impact the financial condition. So accounting changes, changes in financial reporting have an impact on the fiscal indicators due to when the expenditures are recorded, when revenue are recorded, and essentially when they're booked. And again, sometimes the things that should have been reported in the previous year are reported in the current year, and those things need to be taken into account. For the recommendations, it is a full discussion of what the organization, the nonprofit, needs to do to improve its fiscal condition. Again, if we're talking about revenue increasing, what specific revenue items need to be increased, and are those increases going to be sustained from year to year? As I discussed for the Covenant House, for example, there was a few revenue items that increased, one revenue item that increased over 1,000-fold. The question is that increase in revenue going to be sustained from year to year? If that increase in revenue is not going to be sustained from year to year, then that is going to present fiscal problems, may present fiscal problems over the long run, because that revenue revenue item that increased by 1,000-fold in 1 year may not increase. That may be an anomaly, and it may return to the normal rate of increase. So if we're talking about implementing programs and services based on 1 year collection of revenue for one particular year, because you have one good year of revenue growth, the recommendation is going to be is that you cannot expand programs and services as quickly as you anticipated, because that revenue item is not going to be increasing 1,000-fold every subsequent year. And again, that may be an anomaly. So if you're looking at recommendations, you need to recommend those revenues that are likely to increase. What is the most conservative? What is most likely to be the annual increase in revenue items? And again, that's for each revenue item. If revenue items are going to be stable, then they're going to be stable. If there's opportunities to grow grant money, rent governmental revenue, then the recommendation is that you're going to try to increase those, but that increase needs to be on the conservative side, because if you overestimate that and you decide to increase expenditures, then you're going to have fiscal problem at the end of the year. So the recommendations are when you conduct when you calculate the fiscal indicators, the recommendations need to be made with a lot of conditions, meaning that if revenue increased by X amount, then the financial condition of the organization should increase. If you control expenditures or decrease expenditures, that's likely to increase the financial condition. So the recommendations need to be based on the findings, but also take into account how the data are reported. The last step of the report is the full discussion of next steps. So what does it? So you provided the recommendation. The next steps are basically the implementation of the recommendation. How should the organization go about in implementing your recommendations? Looking at the recommendations, which ones have the most urgency, which ones are the priority, and how should the organization then go about in implementing your recommendations? As I stated earlier, if we're talking about the fiscal health of the organization is being driven by expenditures, then you go ahead and control expenditures before you try to have revenue increases. However, there may be opportunities where you increase revenue and decrease expenditures at the same time. The revenue increases need to be for those items that can be increased fairly quickly. The question is, what is going to be the revenue growth for those items? Is it going to be 1% increase or 2% increase or more? Then obviously in the long term it's going to be those revenue items which are going to be difficult or uncertain to obtain, like grants and intergovernmental revenue. In some instances, those revenue are more of a long-term, have a long-term horizon because you need to apply for the grant, which you may not yet get the grant. If you do get the grant, it may be lower than we anticipated. If you get intergovernmental revenue, that intergovernmental revenue may have a lot of stipulations so that you may only have those intergovernmental may be used for only certain things and not for things that are increasing very quickly. And so there are a lot of things that you need to consider when you start looking at those revenue items that have a long-term horizon. So that is essentially assignment number 2, a lot easier than assignment number 1. And this one you're looking at financial reports, so you don't have anything abstract to deal with. Here you have the financial reports, you have the 990 forms, and so all the indices pretty much have a standardized formula. And then the question is, will the right information, don't make the mistakes that I made? And so again, that's the components of the paper. First you write the paper, then you write the executive summary. The executive summary is exactly what the name implies. It's a summary of the findings, summary of the report, summary of the data analysis, quick short sentences on problem statement. The introduction is why you conducted the assessment, why is it important to conduct the assessment, and the reason why we're conducting the financial condition analysis is to find opportunities to increase the fiscal health of the organization, to make sure that it's sustainable, to make sure that programs and services are adequately funded, and to make sure that the organization is doing the best that it can to manage its revenue and manage its expenditures. Again, there's also benefits to conducting the financial analysis. It also shows donors, corporate donors, individual donors, that the revenue is being administered wisely. There are mechanisms to control expenditures, and so that you're providing the maximum amount of services to clients that you have. And again, it basically shows that there's good stewardship of revenue. There's good stewardship in terms of expenditures, and then essentially you're safeguarding the corporate and individual donations, but also safeguarding all the revenue items from any type of misuse or misallocation to programs and services. So the first half hour, as I stated, is dedicated to the structure of the of assignment number 2. I will go ahead and send this out to all of you when I get back to the office after the lecture. And then I will also, as is now customary, I will go ahead and post the video to the channel, and I will send the email stating that it's up there, and you should look at the first 30 minutes of the lecture, if you're not going to see all of it. The first 30 minutes of the lecture, because that covers assignment number 2. So now that I completed the discussion of assignment number 2, let me go back to the supplemental lecture on program assessment models. And again, the reason for covering the assessment models is that each different type of assessment answers different questions with respect to how the organization is being managed, with respect to clients being served, with respect to goals and objectives, and with respect to outcomes. So let me close this PowerPoint, and then let me get the PDF file for the continuation of the program assessment models. Now, if you remember from last week, I started to cover a number of assessment methods that are used to assess organizations, both on the public sector side, the private sector side, and for nonprofits. And I covered management-oriented models. I covered client-based models, customer-oriented models. I covered some of the goal-oriented models. What you see on the screen now is the participant-oriented models, and the participant-oriented assessments, they look at the examined participants with respect to their level of satisfaction with services, with programs and services, whether they believe the programs are actually beneficial to them. They also examine whether the program is actually delivering the services that they should be delivering. And so understanding what participants view as being important, as being critical to them, helps the organization to then look at the programs and services that it offers and to make changes to those programs and services based on participant input. And this is on page slide number 31 of the supplemental lecture. And the one I'm going to discuss now is a continuation from last week, is a response to the evaluation paradigm. And I'm going to make that larger on the screen. So, and I mentioned that these assessment models are very time intensive. They're very hard to conduct, even the most simplest one. And again, as I mentioned, and as you probably realized, most nonprofits do not have very thorough data that are available. In many instances, there's a lot of turnover, so a lot of their organizational history is gone. And generally, that history is gone because it's never documented, and if it is documented, it's sporadic, or it may have resided in somebody's computer, and that and when that computer is gone, then all the history, all the organizational history is gone. If it resides within an individual, once that individual leaves the organization, then that organizational history goes with that person, and so it makes conducting assessments extremely difficult with nonprofits. Again, it's staff turnover, it's the lack of data collection, the lack of any standardized procedures. And so what happens with nonprofits, again, the assessments become extremely difficult to conduct, and the assessments are not as thorough as they should be. On the participant side, so when you're conducting a participant-oriented observation, the thing is that many of the participants aren't interviewed. If they are interviewed, those interviews may not be as thorough as they should be. And so what ends up happening is that there's a lot of superficial information that are collected, that is collected from participants. And so the scope of the assessment may be narrow, and there's a lot of when participants tend to be selected for a study, it's those participants that are most likely to have a most favorable view of the organization, programs and services that are likely to be selected. So to some extent, the participant-oriented assessments are biased from the standpoint that staff tend to only refer clients that have a favorable opinion of the programs and services that they receive, and so there's a full spectrum of opinions that aren't collected. So back to this slide number 32. So the first step in conducting this responsive evaluation method is the first step is to talk with clients, program staff, and audiences. So here, what you want to do is get the views of both the participants, clients with respect to program services, and also program staff. And it's critical to get program staff because they're the ones that are actually delivering the services to the participants. Many times those program and services are being modified in an unsystematic way, and so the changes that are occurring may occur on a weekly or monthly basis or quarterly basis based on clients that they receive. And so what's happened is that what should be a standardized process for program and service administration actually changes quite often because there are no standardized procedures, but also that the nature of the participants is changing from quarter to quarter, or from year to year, from period to period. And so, for example, if your participant, if the gender makeup of the participants is changing, then the programs are going to be modified to make sure that the programs attempt to meet the needs of the changing demographics. If you have ethnic changes or changes in age, the age cohorts, then the programs may be modified in an unsystematic way by program staff to meet the special needs or to meet the needs of the changing population. That when you start talking to participants and you start talking to programs, that may be something that may arise. It could be that just the programs aren't being delivered as they are intended to be delivered, and that's more on the organizational side, or the programs that should be delivered to meet the needs of the participants is not working as effectively as it should be because the needs of the population have actually changed due to the change in the population, and so the programs themselves may not keeping in step with the program, or keeping in step with the needs of the participants. So first you start with clients. You identify program scope, right? So what aspects of the program is it going to be a comprehensive overview of the program and service? If so, then what does that actually entail? Or is it going to be a very narrow assessment? Are you going to look at certain aspects of the program? Again, my perspective on conducting assessments is that you conduct a thorough assessment of all the program and services because that shows again how they're interrelated and whether there are integration points between the programs and services. Are there overlaps, in other words? And so I tend to favor a more comprehensive, holistic approach to analyzing programs and services. Some organizations just look at one program. Again, looking at one program may not be as beneficial as examining all of the different programs and services, especially when there are overlaps. After you identify the program, you identify the scope of the assessment, then you overview the program activities. Again, if the program activities are standardized and are consistent from quarter to quarter, from year to year, based on and if the population remains stable in terms of ethnicity, in terms of age, in terms of gender, then it's fine to overview the program activities. It seems to be a fairly relatively straightforward assessment. However, if there are changes that have occurred from the prior year to the current year in terms of activities that are being offered, then that change needs to be taken into account. If the population is changing has changed or is undergoing a dramatic demographic change, then those changes also need to be taken into account, because that's going to affect the nature of the program and services and the activities that are undertaken to deliver that program. Once the overview of the activities is set, then you go ahead and start conducting. You undertake the concerns or the purpose of the program with respect to the participants. And so you go ahead and again, you try to get a very representative sample of the population, of the participants, so that you view both positive and the negative sides of the program and service delivery. So essentially it is similar to conducting a SWOT analysis. You look at the strengths, you look at the weaknesses, you look at any opportunities, you look at threats, and these are all based by the participants and the program staff. So you discover the purpose for the program, discover the purpose for conducting the assessment. You take down all the concerns of both the program staff and the participants with respect to how programs and services are being delivered. Once you do that, then you conceptualize the issues and problems. And this is very similar to what I've asked you to do for both assignment number 1 and assignment 2. Based on the data collection that you have, then what are the issues? And assignment number 1, what were the service delivery issues? And assignment number 2 is what are the fiscal condition issues and what are the problems? And so you conceptualize those issues and those problems. You essentially then specify the problem statement based on the input from the participants, inputs from the program staff, based on what the program should be delivering, how they ought to be delivering, how those program services ought to be delivered. All of those are taken all together to conceptualize the issues and the problems to arrive at a problem statement. Once you do that, then you identify the data that you need in order to substantiate or verify the issues and the problems that you identified. And again, this is where a lot of the assessments start to break down, because a lot of the data that are required for the assessments are not collected. If they are collected, they're done so in a very superficial way, so detailed data are not available. So you identify the data needs regarding all of the issues and the problem statement. Hopefully you obtain that data. Once you have identified the data needs, and then you select the individuals who are actually going to be conducting the assessment, you provide ways to collect the data. If that means either through pen and paper, through the archive, anything else archive, or a combination of the two, or also conducting interviews. Once you do that, then you need to look at the program and any of the antecedents. Antecedents means anything that is done to the program, that changed the program, then how was delivered to participants, was that delivery in a way that was consistent with prior years? So there are things that that affect performance, and those things that affect performance need to be taken into account. Again, they could be anything that has to do with if there was changes in report, changes in how data were collected, if there are changes in terms of the activities if the program activities were changed during the mid-year, and all of that needs to be taken into account, because that is going to affect how participants view the program, and if it's individuals, you also take into account that some individuals started prior to the activities being changed. Some individuals came after the activities were changed. So there are different cohorts, and so those different cohorts of participants also need to be specified as to when someone comes into the program, whether they're before the changes, whether they're also after the changes, because that's going to then affect how participants view the program. It's also going to affect how program staff view the program. They're going to view those activities as either improving the program or having a negative effect on the program. And it also means that the program itself has changed, and those program changes, activity changes, may not coincide with the goals and objectives that were set prior to the program being carried out or being performed for the particular year. So all those things need to be taken into account, because those things that occurred before the program was implemented have a huge impact on the outcomes and outputs. Once you identify all of the steps that occurred, all the antecedents, then you prepare case studies. You identify the themes and the concepts that were articulated by program staff and also by participants. Things such as the program works well, the program doesn't work well, the program is effective, the program is ineffective. So you try to find out the program was poorly managed, is poorly managed, the activities weren't implemented the way they were. So you have themes and concepts that are being articulated by program staff, by participants, and you have to then classify those themes. You have to then go ahead and start creating case studies. Which case studies are those that provide a sort of positive reinforcement of the program? Which ones are negative case studies? Which ones are in between? And then what do the case studies actually say for the program and the services? What does it say about the administration of the program and service? What does it say about the effectiveness of the program? What does it say about the efficiency of the program? So you get all of this data from participants and from program staff. Take into account all the caveats with respect to changes in activities, changes in demographics, changes in the target population. All of those are then used to either validate or confirm, or also to disconfirm things about the program. So once you validate and confirm all the data, all the things that are being presented to you, then you go ahead and you start formalizing the report to the audience that you want to report to. And in this case, it's either going to be the board of directors or the executive director. It also could be for the media. It could also be for clients. It could be for program for corporate donors. It could be for individual donors. So there are multiple audiences. So the report needs to be not necessarily tailored, but it needs to be written for either one or two. Whether it's going to be an internal report or it's going to be an external report. And so the report needs to be written in a way that it's going to be understood by the audience that you are targeting. Once you start identifying the audiences, then you start assembling a formal report. And again, that's look at all the data, look at all the information that you collected. What does it say about the program and services? What needs to be changed? What are the recommendations? And who should be making the recommendations? Or is it just going to be a general report as a marketing tool to give out to corporate donors, individual donors, or is it going to be a marketing tool to attract more clients? again, so the audience needs to be identified and the report needs to then be written so that it has maximum visibility with respect to the audience that the report is going to be aimed at. And again, this is similar to what you guys are doing for this course in terms of the assignments. You identify the scope of the analysis. For assignment number 2 is that you're looking at the financial condition. You collect all the data that are available based on the 990 forms or the audited financial reports. You identify, based on the indices that you calculate, you identify the issues. Is it what is increasing, what's decreasing, what is the possible financial threats, what are the financial opportunities, what are the weaknesses of the organization, what are the strengths in terms of financial reporting. You identify the issues. You then go ahead and then prepare the report based on what you find. Again, so there's, although the different models are geared towards different audiences, or the models are based on management side, on the process side, or client side, they all basically have a similar structure. They all require the data to be collected. They all require the data to be interpreted. They all require the data to be once you have the findings, that there are going to be recommendations that are going to be made. So this one here again looks at participants and what those participants, both on the program side and the client side, say about the program that's being assessed. On slide number 33, you have the empowerment evaluation paradigm. This one is focused, is the empowerment evaluation method, and it solicits information from the least powerful or served stakeholders or participants. And so here, what you try to do is assess, get information from those individuals that are being served by the program and service the least. So these are the individuals that are not benefiting from the program, are not full participants of the program in comparison to others. So the empowerment assessment method attempts to train stakeholders and participants, train them with respect to the program and services. From an internal side, you are training the individuals that are directly related to the program with respect to offering those program and services in the most effective way, so that those individuals that are the least, those that are not fully benefiting of the program are then able to take full advantage of the program and services that are being offered. You provide coaching and facilitate stakeholder participants in respect to the program. Programs being offered. You also provide them an opportunity for self-evaluation. And so here is that from the client perspective is what should he or she do to then maximize his or her benefits? How does he or she then maximize the participation in the program and services? So there are things that an individual has to do by himself or herself that are going to make that person become a full participant in the program and services, so that he or she can then benefit maximally from the program and service. From an internal side, if you're looking at the program staff, then the coaching is what can the program managers or the individuals that are delivering the services, what can they do to then provide the maximum amount of service to the client. While some of you may not view me as trying to do so. I have tried to do so. So I, specifically with respect to the technical issues that we've been having, I've tried to then go ahead and assess what can I do to go ahead and make this class accessible. How can I improve it, given that we had issues from the beginning of the quarter, and also given that I was came here at a fairly short and quick time, so I did not have the time horizon to prepare for this course as I would if I was given more sufficient time. So again, so you talk about self-evaluation from the least powerful perspective, is that there are things that both staff can do and the client can do to go ahead and maximize performance and maximize the participation in the program and services. Then there's program advocacy, and that essentially means how can you advocate for the program to be maximally utilized by the least powerful individuals, least powerful individuals who participate in the program and service. That means essentially how can you get those individuals that are not full participants to actually become participants, and so it becomes a more advocacy of the program to those individuals, so that those individuals can then go ahead and become full participants and benefit maximally from the program and service. The other aspect is that given that you're looking at the least powerful individuals that are affected and are participants in the program and service, you try to enlighten them with respect to what the program is supposed to be accomplishing, how the program and services are delivered. You try to enlighten the staff as to what is done correctly or appropriately, what isn't working. So essentially look at the strengths and the weaknesses of the program with respect from the least powerful individual. You look at any threats or any opportunities that the program has with respect to the least powerful individual who participates in the program. And then ultimately what you do is you, based on the assessment, then you go ahead and give the opportunity for the program staff and also participants to become fully engaged in the program and service. And again, this evaluation method looks at the most vulnerable individuals in the program, or those that are benefiting the least. Now, on slide number 35 is the process-oriented evaluations. And these I've done multiple times. And again, this is based on understanding the process, the program and service delivery process, both on the private side, the public sector side, and the nonprofit side. And so what you do is that with the process methods, is that you assess the inputs and outputs and activities of the program in relation to outputs and outcomes. Again, this was partly due in assignment number 1. It was looking at the inputs of the program, and then what are the outputs and what are the outcomes. So the service delivery model serves as the basis for conducting the process-oriented assessments. And again, all of this is interrelated and interconnected, and it should be an integrated process. And so although I'm discussing these assessment methods I'm discussing the different types of methods sort of in isolation or disconnected from each other. But in many instances, there's a lot of overlap in the assessment methods. And again, I tend to focus more, I try to use a more hybrid approach to conducting assessments when I conduct them, given that I know that things are interrelated and they should be, things are interconnected and things should be integrated. And so with respect to the process method, process of evaluations, I look at the process of how services are being delivered from the context of what should they be accomplishing in terms of goals and objectives, the process in terms of how did management, program staff actually implement the program. And in terms of process, I'm looking at it in terms of what should they be achieving, and are they achieving them in a way that it's most beneficial to the clients. So the purpose of a process-oriented evaluation is to provide insight to program governance and the structure. So what is the program actually supposed to do? How are they supposed to do it? Why are they doing it the way they're doing it? Provide insight to program management and oversight with respect to, is the program, are the processes in place actually providing the most maximum amount of service to the clients? Is the process streamlined? Is it efficient? And is it effective? And then you provide insights and recommendations for quality assurance given on the process. So is the again, in terms of the process, you look at it when the individual comes into to obtain the service. Is the triage as effective and as efficient as it ought to be? What criteria do you have? The eligibility criteria are there, and do the clients meet those eligibility criteria? And if not, then why not? And what is it the program? What is the processes of the program to make sure that that clients actually do meet the eligibility requirements? So what data are being collected? So all of this then provides insights for making recommendations to ensuring that the program and services are actually delivering quality services in the most effective and efficient way possible. So the process-oriented methods review program goals and objectives, and what are the expected and intended outcomes and also outputs. And again, some of you may be saying, oh, he's still talking, Professor Wahar is still talking about assignment number 1. Yes, because the service delivery model of the program affects how programs are delivered, whether they are effective, whether they're efficient, and whether the clients are benefiting maximally from the services that they are receiving. So the core of the organization and what leads to a good assessment organization is that the goals and objectives of the program need to be clearly stated. They need to be tied to the mission. The programs and services themselves then need to provide mechanisms for ensuring that the program's goals and objectives are being met. It needs to make sure that there are outputs as to what should be achieved, the number of clients being served. There should be outcomes that are tied to every program. What is it that we want to achieve, and how do we measure whether the clients are actually achieving those the goals and objectives and the outcomes. And it's the process in place that's going to go ahead and do that. And as I mentioned before, one of the things that is lacking in most nonprofits is the inability to collect data. You need data from the program side, you need data from the clients, you need data about how programs are actually being, how the programs are implemented and how they're being carried forward. Not only is data not collected as well as it should be, there's actually very little organizations, both on the private side, the public side, and the nonprofit side, seldom ever take the opportunity to then diagram the processes that are in place. Understanding, generating process maps from when the clients come in to different decision points that are taken for the client based on the program and services are actually very critical, because individuals are making decisions as to whether or not the client needs to go into one program or another program. They're making decisions as to whether or not the individual meets the criteria of the program. And so there are decisions that are made throughout the administration of the program that affect the outputs and affect the outcomes and affect whether or not the program is effective and efficient. So having process maps of an actual program is important, because that also leads to understanding what data need to be collected, how to assess the program at each process, and also whether the program, you look at also whether the program has touch points or integration points with other programs, and then how this program A affects program B based on the overlap of services, or based on the integration points that are actually identified. So having process maps is actually very important and very critical. It helps to assess program efficiency, program effectiveness, productivity, and service levels. Undertaking a process evaluation of a program leads to process indicators to outcome indicators, and that's at every step of the process. Process-oriented evaluations also are important for identifying major functions and activities. What generally happens in most organizations, both on the private side, the public sector side, the nonprofit side, is that a lot of the major functions of programs are not identified, and in many cases the activities aren't identified, and so each program has tasks and activities that are associated with it. In other words, there are mechanisms that are in place to deliver that program and service. Those mechanisms are either based on particular tasks that should be done within each particular task, and then there are activities that are undertaken to actually make sure that the program is carried forward. In many cases, those major functions and activities are not identified, because no one has taken the time to actually map out how the program should have been implemented and how it actually was implemented. The other thing is about doing process maps or process-oriented evaluations that identify decision points. Decision points are those points where there's a question that is asked. Should the client, for example, should a client be assigned to program A or program B? That is a decision. That decision then affects the performance of program A, and it definitely affects the program, the effectiveness of program B. It affects the resource allocation for program B and program A based on decisions, the key decision points that are made with respect to whether client goes to program A, B, or C. Again, that affects outputs, that affects outcomes. And in many cases, a lot of the critical decision points are not taken into view or are not assessed, and so the program managers and executive directors and nonprofits don't really understand how decisions are made and how those decisions then affect clients and how it affects resource utilization and how it affects program effectiveness and efficiency. As I mentioned, process maps also identify integration points where things are interrelated, things that are cross-functional activities. And so what I mean by cross-functional activities are program A, program B, and program C may have components within them that actually are overreaching or overarching, and they cut across the organization. And those things have indirect and direct impacts on the different programs and services. When those are identified, when programs are viewed in isolation without taking into account other programs, then how those programs and activities of one particular program affect across the other organizations is not understood or taken into account, because the integration points are not part of the assessment. And so a good process-oriented method looks at all of the process of particular programs and its linkages to other aspects of the organization. Also, it provides a document of the process flow for various programs and services. So a process-oriented evaluation looks at program mission, goals and objectives, looks how the programs are then implemented. When those programs are implemented, it looks at particular tasks and activities, and whether those tasks and activities then affect other programs and services. On slide number 38, excuse me, on slide number 38, there's a consulting project I did for Nassau County, roughly about 12 years ago, maybe longer than that, which shows it was a very in-depth analysis of the organization's multiple programs and services. So we did myself and a colleague at the time, we took a process-oriented evaluation of looked at the processes of the programs and services in the Consumer Affairs Office in Nassau County. Based on that assessment, we identified the overlapping activities and how the different programs impact each other. So on slide number 39, this is the beginning of the process map for the complaint investigations and resolution program or division in the Consumer Affairs Office in Nassau County. You notice that there are four boxes as to how complaints are issued, or how they initiate the process. So one is there's a consumer can complain via phone inquiry. That leads to a particular task and activity. Another complaint can also be issued. A consumer complaint can also be initiated through the internet. That generates a different task and activity. An individual a consumer can mail his or her complaint. Again, that starts particular tasks and activities. And a person can then have a personal contact, go into the office, initiate the consumer complaint. So there are four mechanisms that are in place that drive the initiation of the consumer complaint, as you can see from the process map, if those that are initiated on the phone have a particular track, the ones that are initiated on the by mail and the internet have a particular track, and those that are then initiated by personal contact going into the office have a particular track. As you can tell, the diamond boxes, the diamond shaped forms are critical decision points. Those are questions that are based on a particular action being taken. It's either yes or no. If it's no, then it goes to a particular way. If it's yes, it goes a particular way. So let me go focus on the left-hand side where the complaints are initiated by the phone inquiry. So let me expand this. So if a complaint is issued on a phone inquiry, the Office of Consumer Affairs prepares a mailing of the COA complaint form. Once a complaint form is prepared, the mailroom sends out the mailing to the individual who started the complaint by a phone inquiry. Once that um, the complaint form is mailed to the individual making the complaint, the the mailing of the complaint form is mailed back to mailed from the recipient back to the Office of Consumer Affairs. And then there's a critical decision point. Did the person making the complaint mail the form? It's either no or yes. If it's no, then it becomes a dead case. The investigation is terminated. Now, in terms of process, there are several indicators that can be generated just on this couple of steps. The one step is that how long does it take OCA, Office of Consumer Affairs, OCA, to prepare the form? How much resources are being used to prepare the form? When is the form actually mailed out? So you can time it when the person received when the complaint was made by the phone, through the phone. How long did it take OCA to prepare the form? So there's a processing time. Once the form is mailed, then when was the form mailed? If the mail room is at the office of OCA. Unfortunately, the mailing room for Nassau County is centralized, so the forms need to be then sent out through the centralized mail office. And again, that affects processing time because if the mail is held for a couple of days and then issued out, then that affects processing time. And also that means there's a data gap because OCA has no control as to when the centralized mailing office actually mails the form. That data is outside of the purview of the office. However, when the form is returned, that date can be tracked, can be archived. So in terms of processing time, if you can look at it in terms of the days that it took from the initial telephone inquiry to when the actual form was returned. So that affects processing time. If the form is returned, as you can tell from the diagram, then the Office of Consumer Affairs reviews the complaint for completeness. Now the whole mailing process is bypassed if an individual submits a complaint through the internet or website, or the complaint is actually then mailed, received by mail, and if the individual downloads the document and then submits it, then you bypass all the mailings, the first set of aspects, and you go straight to OCA reviews the complaint for completeness. Once that's done, there is a critical decision point. Is the complaint complete? No. The complaint is, the person that made the complaint is contacted. Once that individual is contacted and amends the complaint, then OCA then go ahead and reviews the complaint again for completeness. If the complaint is then complete, if it's yes, OCA then logs the complaint and the process begins. Again, for all of this, there could be data that's collected, and key performance indicators can be assessed, particularly for those that weren't, those complaints that weren't thorough. When did OCA receive it? When did it send it out? When was the complaint then reprocessed? So there's a processing time that can be tracked. If OCA makes a decision that yes, the complaint is thorough, then OCA logs the complaint, as I said, begins the process. Process is, once the process is initiated, the decision, another decision, critical decision point is, another critical decision point needs to be taken into account, and that is the complaint have any merit or standing, as it's called in the legal profession? Does the client have standing? Is it a merit? Is it is it a legitimate complaint? If it's no, the complaint is the person making the complaint is notified and the investigation is terminated. If the complaint has merit and it has some standing, then there's another decision point. Is an in-house resolution, yes or no? If there's an in-house resolution, then OCA classifies the complaint by type. If the complaint has no in-house resolution, then OCA then refers it to the appropriate jurisdiction, agency or jurisdiction. That can be a criminal complaint to the prosecutor's office. It can be to the state, it can be to a federal agency. And so again, that you can look at in terms of process, in terms of key performance indicator, you can look at those out of all the total number of inquiries that are made to OCA, how many of them have merit, how many of them don't, and how many of them are referred to an outside agency. And so you can keep those key performance indicators so you can then assess the demand for service and which ones are actually have merit and which ones don't. And again, that helps to track number of complaints, but it also helps to then identify the service industry with the most complaints. So there are multiple key performance indicators that can be calculated based on this particular process. So if the complaint has the merit, it is then has an in-house resolution. OCA then classifies that complaint by type. And again, there are different types of complaints. One type of complaint is some improvement. If it's yes, then it goes to sub-process number A. If it's no, then is it a retail? If it's a retail complaint, then it goes to B. If it's no, is it another type of complaint? And if it's yes, then it goes to C. Now, in terms of the process for those that complaints that are in-person contacts, the critical decision point that comes very quickly is whether or not the complaint was initiated by OCA staff. No, then it goes to the process down here. OCA logs the complaint and begins the process. So a person actually comes in and files his or her complaint. If it's yes, that the complaint excuse me, was initiated by OCA, because the Office of Consumer Affairs has investigators. So if they go ahead and make a complaint, then it has to be documented. Was it a special investigation? Yes. Then OCA sends the investigator staff person to the site and they collect the data. If it's no, then it follows another process. OCA classifies the complaint by type, and that is a home improvement complaint, is it retail, or is it another type? If yes, it is a special complaint, then OCA again sends the investigative staff to collect the data. Once the OCA staff collects it, then the OCA makes a determination: is the complaint have standing, yes or no? No, ends, yes. Then go ahead and determines if it's an in-house solution. Is it referring the complaint to an outside investigation? If it's in-house, then again that includes: is it a home improvement? Is it retail? Or is it another? So this is just again looking at the types of complaints that are initiated, how they're initiated, what is the process that's involved. Again, yes, sir.
Hi. You don't mind if I just pass through here to go out?
I'm video taping. You can go around.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, go out the back.
No problem.
Is that the door? Okay, that's fine. right, no problem. And so, again, looking at the home improvement complaints, that follows a particular process, and it goes to process A. And process A is based on a meritorious complaint. So in a home improvement process, the contractor is a contractor licensed, yes or no? If a contractor is not licensed, then there's an unlicensed contractor complaint, and that goes to K1. So there's a whole process for that. And I apologize that this is a little tedious, but I'm illustrating how process evaluations are conducted. So if the complaint has merit, and if the contractor is licensed, then yes, there's a licensed contractor, and that starts another process, another function. That OCA issues a letter to the vendor, to the home contractor. OCA attempts to conduct a mediation with the person making the complaint and the home improvement licensed vendor. Once the mediation begins and goes through the process, the question is the mediation successful, yes or no? If it's yes, then it terminates the investigation. The solution is found. If it's no, then OCA further reviews to determine whether an arbitration investigation is necessary. That leads to a critical decision point. It's either yes or no. If it's not assigned to mediation, then OCA assigns an investigator to review the complaint and the severity of the complaint. That leads to another critical decision. Is the complaint severe, yes or no? If it's no, then OCA issues a warning letter to the home improvement person, and OCA then continues to monitor the licensed home improvement contractor. If it's yes, OCA issues a citation violation. That's given to the licensed contractor. OCA still continues to monitor the licensed contractor home improvement. And then the contractor is either in compliance. If it's yes, then it terminates. If it's no, then it goes to process number C. And again, for all of these, key performance indicators can be generated. As I mentioned, if the complaint has merit and if there's an unlicensed contractor, then it goes to A1. And here's the process for A1. So you have an unlicensed contractor complaint. OCA issues a citation penalty. After that, OCA schedules a meeting with the unlicensed contractor, and then you have another function, which we label HP, the hearing process. Once there's a hearing, so it goes to the hearing process, but it also OCA recommends has a recommendation to assess a fee. Once that fee is received, it goes to the revenue side, to the revenue process. So again, you have integration points with hearing process, you have an integration point with revenue collection and accounting. So the process maps again show how the what initiates the process, the program and service delivery. Based on the receipt of the individual coming in, it then determines what track the individual goes to or what program. At each program, there's critical decision points, whether the individual meets the criteria, yes or no. If it's no, then what does the individual need to meet the criteria? Does it need more documentation? If it's yes, then there's another, then yes, the individual continues with the process. If there are any sub-processes or any interrelated functions, touch points with the program and the service to other aspects of the organization. That's all documented. Those are identified in the process mapping. There are there are key performance indicators that may be generated by each function and process, task, and activity. That data should be all collected and archived because that's going to impact the effectiveness and efficiency of the program. It's going to affect the demand for the service. It's going to affect resource allocation, and not just in terms of revenue, but in terms of personnel. It's also going to affect any types of program costs. Like for example, in OCA, there's a cost to OCA when they mail, when they go ahead and process mailings to the person making the complaint. They incur operating costs when they mail the complaint to the vendor that is the recipient or the respondent to the complaint. So there are program costs, the utilization of materials, the utilization of human resources, utilization of revenue. That affects program costs. So all of these are then taken into account by the process map. If you start generating key performance indicators by function, by task and activity. It also shows the demand and the interrelatedness into other functions and activities in the organization. Again, if you look at page 41, under process A1, there's a hearing process that's affected. When fees are assessed, that affects the revenue, the financial function of the organization, because that revenue needs to be recorded. Once that revenue is recorded, it also has impacts to other county agencies, for example, the controller's office, also the treasurer's office, because that revenue needs to be accounted for by the accounting office. It needs to be reported to the treasurer's office because that affects cash flow. So when you start doing process maps, you identify all the different areas of the organization that are affected. Now, this particular project took 3 months to do because there weren't any process maps in the organization. None of the functions or activities were ever documented, and so there were changes that were going to be made that were going to impact the organization. And so the then commissioner of the Office of Consumer Affairs, Roger Boxted, asked me and Colin to go ahead and conduct the assessment. So we undertook the assessment. He wanted to know what was the different processes that were in place, and so we documented the processes that were in place. It took us 3 months, based on the process maps for each entire program and service, for each function. We then provided recommendations based on looking at the strengths, looking at weaknesses, looking at opportunities, looking at threats, and so those recommendations were then made, and we also provided ways to implement those recommendations. And so if you look at the process maps, again, most organizations do not like doing these process maps because they are time consuming. However, if you want to streamline activities and streamline operating costs, streamline programs and services, then process mapping is a very good way of doing it, because it identifies key decision points within the process. It identifies why things either go forward or don't go forward. It identifies how the program and services are interrelated. It identifies what functions and activities are interrelated. It shows why the whole program and services should be an integrated process with accounting and financial reporting and human resources and the management of the organization. So understanding what drives the programs, how they are implemented, what are the goals and activities of the programs, are all very essential for making sure that resources are being managed correctly, expenditures are being controlled, making sure that sufficient data is being collected to generate key performance indicators to show how well the program is functioning, whether it's effective, whether it's efficient, looking at demand of service, looking at quality of service. So doing a process-oriented evaluation touches on all aspects of the organization, from mission to goals and objectives, again, to resource allocation, to demand of service, to quality of service, and also it identifies those functions and activities that are interrelated to other functions and activities within the organization. B, slide 42. If I go back to the slide number, to the first line, again, I covered A is for home improvement. There's a process for home improvement complaints. B is all those that are retail. For retail, if I go back to slide 42, it has its whole different process. So if there's a complaint issued on the retail client, again, the OCA issues a letter to the vendor. The OCA attempts to mediate. If the mediation is successful, it terminates. If it's not, then to conduct further investigation. It's assigned to arbitration. Is an arbitration is yes, then it initiates the hearing process. If it's no, then OCA assigns an investigator. The investigator then decides whether the complaint is serious. How severe is it? If it's severe, then OCA issues a letter. Again, if it's not severe, issues a letter. If it is severe, a citation is issued. The citation then leads to vendor compliance. If vendor compliance is yes, it terminates. If it's no, then it goes to C. C is a different process, different function. Again, you look at it, there's looking at a retail complaint, they're going through the process, it goes to the hearing process. If the decision is favorable to the vendor, it terminates. If it's not favorable to the vendor, it means that the person initiating the complaint, the decision was in his or her favor. Then the vendor, the retailer, is ordered to pay a fee. If the fee is initiated, then it goes to the accounting revenue collection function of the Office of Consumer Affairs. If there's a fee that is initiated, that also leads to the vendor needs to cease and desist from operating the way he or she is operating, and may be subject to additional penalties. If the retail vendor is in compliance, then it terminates. If it's no, then OCA then refers the case to the district attorney's office or the attorney general, and then that becomes that is outside of the purview of the Office of Consumer Affairs. So that then goes ahead and triggers off the processes in the district attorney's office or the attorney general for the state of New York. Again, those processes are not mapped because that's outside of the scope of the agency. What is mapped, though, is the hearing process and the revenue process. So here's the revenue process. Once the fees are issued to a home improvement vendor or an online vendor or any client, even a non-licensed contractor or unlicensed vendor, OCA assesses the violation, issues a violation fee against the vendor. The vendor pays the violation fee by mail or in person. OCA certifies the check. Other money payable to Nassau County. There is a sub-process here that isn't identified. As once OCA issues it's collected, did the vendor send it by mail or in person? Yes or no? And then check, then the check is certified, money order certified, make sure it's paid in Nassau County. If the check money order is paid to Nassau County, if it's not, it's returned back to the vendor. If it's yes, OCA reports it in the, as a manual receipt that's issued to the person that was issued the fee. The fees, however, are in this case are manual checks and so forth and so on. And so, is the payment a split check? Yes or no? If it's yes, then that has a process. If it's no, then it has a process. And so, process continues. Revenue is recorded. Completeness that ends. Revenue is recorded by administration. And so on the revenue side, there is a whole function for the revenue side, when it recognizes revenue, is the check appropriate or not. And so again, these are, you can generate performance indicators for the revenue side based on when it receives the payment for the fees, either from the vendor that had the violation filed against him or her or the organization. And so there's a process for that. And again, process mapping shows the process for each function. It shows how they're interrelated. It shows how the process should be integrated. It also shows the activities for each process. It shows the task for each process and then the activities for each task. And again, it also has points, steps where you can generate key performance indicators for each task, for each function, for each task, and for each activity. And as I mentioned earlier, the Office of Consumer Affairs has multiple programs and services. So because we're conducting a comprehensive process mapping of the Office of Consumer Affairs, we look at each program, each service, each task, each activity. On page 45, then we have the process for inspections and for investigations. So there's an inspection process, there's a complaint process. I'm not going to go through all of this, but I'm showing you how there's a mandated inspection, there's a new device inspection. Those inspections are conducted by the field inspector. Is there an annual review, yes or no? If it's yes, that leads to another decision point. Is it a clean inspection, an inspection that was satisfactorily met? If it's yes, OCA updates the process, updates the file, processes the inspection fees, and then there's another process that goes on the revenue side again, and then it terminates the case. If it's no, then OCA then issues a violation. There's an infraction, it issues a violation, then it issues a payment. Payment is yes, no. Then it goes to a different activity. Again, depending on the violation and unpaid fees, then it goes to the district attorney or attorney general or another agency. Right, yeah, the complaint process. That complaint process has either complaint received by phone or by mail. OCA, similar to the other, looks at the completeness. Complete, no, yes. That's a decision point, yes. Then is the complaint history extensive given the vendor? If it's yes, then it goes to the district attorney or attorney general's office or another agency. If it's no, OCA contacts the complainant and updates the complaint information. Right? If it's no, it's not an extensive history with the vendor, then OCA begins an inspection. It's like within the time frame, it should know. If it's no, then the field out inspector performs the inspection. And again, it has a pre-inspection, yes or no, so it then follows the process, and then hopefully it's terminated successfully. If not, then it's referred to the district attorney office or the attorney general office for New York, the state of New York. And so this process is a lot shorter, but also again, there are multiple key performance indicators that can be generated in terms of demand, efficiency, and effectiveness. Some of the services that reside outside of the Office of Consumer Affairs, like for example, when cases are referred to the district attorney's office, then the district attorney's office then generates key performance indicators for any type of cases that are referred to from the Office of Consumer Affairs. The same for the Attorney General for the state of New York. So again, although this was a long section for process mapping, what I tried to do is I tried to show you how one, process mapping is important for the organization because it looks at each program, it looks at what triggers the program to be implemented or for the service to be carried out based on client demand. It shows it links to the goals and objectives of the organization. It links to other functions within the organization, and it shows critical decision points that are made with respect to the program and service. I also try to illustrate how key performance indicators can be generated for each function, each task, and each activity. Again, process mapping is very tedious. It takes an extensive amount of time to do the process mapping. However, the process mapping also leads to ways to streamline functions, streamline activities, identify those things that can be eliminated. It also looks at sources of expenditures. Where can expenditures be controlled? What drives expenditures? And also, if I go back to this slide, page 45 or slide 40, slide 44. It also shows things that can be automated. Here, if you look at the revenue collection for the Office of Consumer Affairs, things are being manually. There's a manual receipt that can be automated. The receipts are totaled manually. So there's a lot of. It's very labor intensive. If you look at this process, there are multiple folders, multiple sets of data that the revenue are recorded in multiple ledgers, which some of those ledgers can be eliminated if things are automated. And one of the recommendations that we did provide, which I will discuss in the next portion of the lecture, was automation and things that can be done to streamline the functions and activities. That also means that once you streamline it, then you have the process, it becomes shorter. Once you shorten the process time, the program becomes more efficient because you're using less resources to perform the tasks and activities. It also becomes more effective in the sense that you're also eliminating a lot of human error that occurs when you have multiple manual entries into ledgers. So again, looking at the process maps also helps to streamline the functions, implement best practices, identify areas where you can reduce costs, reduce processing time. And so what you start doing with process mapping is that you also look at ways where the organization can become more efficient in its service delivery and its program delivery. And again, that's to the benefit of the clients, that's a benefit to the stakeholders, that's also a benefit to the organization in that program and services are becoming more effective and efficient as you go ahead and you start streamlining all the functions, tasks, and activities. So undertaking a thorough process mapping of the organization is very important. Unfortunately, a lot of organizations don't do that, and so there are opportunities for program improvement that aren't taken advantage of because there is no documentation of how actually programs and services are being delivered. And so for the next hour or so, I'm going to discuss the material that is for today. And I'm going to, again, use the Office of Consumer Affairs consulting report as the basis for illustrating how do you do program enhancement based on based on the program service assessments. So give me a second as I go look at the make sure that the audio, the video is camera is functioning the way it's supposed to function. Give me a second. Okay. So this is a lecture for October 4th. Actually, it should be for October 5th. And so for the so if you see on slide number 2, there's the lecture overview, which is going to include program enhancement. And again, program enhancement is based on understanding how program and services are being delivered. It is based on undertaking a program service assessment. And again, those assessments can be made multiple ways. You can look at it from a management-oriented perspective. You can look at it from a client perspective. You can look at it from a participant-oriented perspective. You can look at it in terms of a process-oriented perspective. You can look at it in terms of a hybrid, in terms of looking at multiple aspects of service delivery, from looking at management to process to clients. So you can have a merging, a combination of multiple program assessment methods. So the program assessment essentially is based on the assessment and what needs to be done to the program to improve it. If you're going to do a program assessment, there may be an opportunity to look at the mission and the goals and restate them. There's an opportunity to look at the inputs and how to reallocate the inputs. Again, inputs are financial, human resources, supplies and materials. How are those inputs going to be reallocated to the program based on program enhancement, program modification? Once you have that resource reallocation, then you look at what can be modified. If you completed a process-oriented assessment like I just demonstrated, then that means streamlining functions, streamlining activities, tasks, streamlining activities, so they become more effective and more efficient. Based on that, you may want to restate the outputs and outcomes because the program is changing. Excuse me. As the program changes, the outputs are going to change. The outcomes are going to change based on the program modifications that were implemented. If the mission statement and goal statements change, then the outputs are going to and the outcomes are going to change. They're also going to change based on changes to the inputs and outputs. Excuse me, changes to the inputs. We then recalibrate or recalculate the key performance indicators. The reason for doing that is that the baseline that was established prior to the service program, prior to the program enhancement, are no longer valid because you're not changing the program. Once you make the program change, you're enhancing the program, you're modifying it, you're making changes to revenue input allocations, you're making changes to how the program is being delivered, then you need to start a new baseline. So you need to recalculate each key performance indicator based on the changes in the revenue, changes to the output, and changes to the client base if there's a change to the client base. So you benchmark those, you generate a preliminary benchmark. You then go ahead and make the changes, and as the program is then rolled out, you can collect key performance indicators on a monthly basis, or on a quarterly basis, or at the year end. And then that's how the baseline actually then begins. And then I'm going to show what we did for the Office of Consumer Affairs, what we did for the Office of Consumer Affairs for the state of New York, and I was the finance director. And that was based on the performance and the process mapping that we did. So program enhancement. Program enhancement is the process of modifying an existing program based on the findings of an assessment. Again, that assessment could have taken the form of multiple assessment methods or one particular method. As I covered a few minutes ago, you can look at it from a participant standpoint, you can look at it from a process-oriented standpoint. As I discussed last week, there's a management-oriented assessments. There are goal objectives-oriented assessments. There are client-oriented assessments. There are expertise-oriented assessments. So there are multiple ways to assess a program, and based on those multiple ways of assess a program, the program is then modified based on the findings. Again, going back to assignment number 1, the reason why they asked for the service delivery models was that serves multiple purposes. One, gives you an understanding of how the program and services are administered. What are the inputs that are used to carry out that program, to deliver that program and service to clients? What are the outputs that should be achieved? What are the outcomes that should be achieved? And then all of those different components then lead to the creation of key performance indicators. That is the core, or that is the basis for undertaking any assessment, regardless of what type of assessment. Once you take that assessment, that leads to you providing findings and recommendations. You address the deficiencies of the program and service based on the data that you collect. So for assignment number 2, when I asked, when you're conducting a financial assessment of the organization, you are going to find whether the financial condition of the organization is improving or not improving. What are the deficiencies in terms of, is revenue increasing or decreasing? Is expenditures being controlled? Are they being managed? So looking at the deficiencies or weaknesses, then you then make recommendations for rectifying those deficiencies. You address the service program and service threats. In terms of assignment number 2, is there a threat to grants? Is there a threat to obtaining intergovernmental revenue? Is there a threat with respect to the personnel, human resources is not generating sufficient amount of revenue? So if there's a negative return on human capital. Are assets being utilized so that they generate revenue? If not, then there needs to be an increase in the return on assets. You look at things that can be integrated for program service opportunities. Again, The reason for conducting a process-oriented evaluation for Office of Consumer Affairs was to actually look at cross-functional, cross-organization, functions that cut across the organization, looking at integration points for program and services, and we looked at cross-functional activities for the program in terms of the complaints, the nature of the complaints being filed. So you look at ways to integrate and to streamline. Once you do all that, then you actually implement a corrective action. What does the organization need to do to make sure that the programs are modified, that the programs become more effective and efficient? That's the overview. Excuse me. On slide number 4, I have a diagram that shows the process. Again, you have the program service assessment. Once that is done, you provide the key findings. What is it that the organization needs to do in order to enhance its program and services? Make sure that the program and services are becoming more effective and more efficient. Making sure that the program and services are actually accomplishing the goals and objectives. Making sure that the program and services are going to meet its outputs and more importantly, its outcomes. Once you have the key findings, then you develop an implementation plan and strategy. What should the organization do to make sure that the findings are then implemented? Again, for assignment number 2, we are going to provide me with recommendations for enhancing the fiscal condition of the organization. If we're looking at it from a program and service perspective, then what is it the organization needs to do to improve the program and services in order to maximize the utilization of the service and programs to become effective and efficient, to meet the client needs and to meet the outcomes. Once you develop the implementation plan, you need to prepare the organization for the organizational change that is going to occur. You prepare the organization by either having kickoff meetings, having training sessions, explaining to them why the changes are necessary. So you start preparing the program staff and the leadership for the changes that are going to occur, because you need buy-in. Without buy-in, the implementations that you want to do are not going to be successful. The program modifications that are going to come about are not going to be as successful as they should be if you don't have stakeholder buy-in. Stakeholder buy-in being leadership needs to espouse the changes, needs to support the changes, as well as program staff. It also means that the financial reporting is going to change because the allocations are going to change. Once you prepare the organization for the change, then you implement program or service modifications. When you start implementing the service modifications, every process, everything that is done should be documented. All the issues that arise for the implementation should be documented. And the reason for documenting that is that you're archiving any issues that arise, how they were solved, were they solved in a direct way, or was the changes that occurred were they solved with respect to a workaround? What alternative method was used to implement it? Did the implementation require the acquisition of new technology? Did it require the new processes to be implemented, new documents to be implemented? So when you implement it, you should have a log of issues and resolution. Data, what data were used, was there lack of data? How was the data archived? How was the data recorded? So all of those issues need to be documented as the modifications are implemented. Once the issues, once the program, the modifications are implemented, you look at the mission statement, look at the goal statements, and then you decide whether or not the mission of the organization is to be restated, whether the program mission needs to be restated, and whether the goals need to be restated, because the program has changed. Once the program mission or the organization mission and goal statements are restated, then you need to look at the outputs and the outcomes, and whether there are significant changes, whether there are significant changes to the outputs and significant changes to the outcomes. Once that is done, as the diagram shows, then you recalculate the key performance indicators. It also means that you're looking at the data and whether you need additional data that needs to be collected on the program because the program changed. Does it also mean that there are going to be significant changes to the clientele, or is the clientele population going to be fairly stable with respect to its characteristics, gender, race, ethnicity, age, and so forth? Once then you recalculate the key performance indicators, then you start the whole process again to make sure that what should have occurred actually occurred, that the implementation was successful, the implementation occurred the way it was supposed to, and that the program and services modifications are actually accomplishing what they were intended to accomplish. So that is the process, I guess the life cycle, if you want to call it that, of the process. On slide number 5, there's the restatement of the mission. Whenever there's a significant program service modifications, that's going to affect the mission of the organization, and certainly going to affect the mission of the program and service. So you restate the mission statement based on the program and service enhancements. The scope of the mission is either going to be expanded or narrow based on the program modifications that were made. So if the program modifications were extensive, and the program, and say for example, programs were consolidated. If the programs were consolidated, then that means that the mission statement needs to be expanded, because now you have multiple functions, multiple tasks and activities under one major program. If the scope of the program was narrow, then the mission of the program needs to account for the narrow scope of the program. And so the mission itself becomes more narrow. The mission statement should also incorporate changes to the goals, outputs, and outcomes, because the program modification made significant changes to the outputs and outcomes that are supposed to be achieved, and it made significant changes to the goals of the program. So when you undertake a program enhancement, the goals and objectives of the program change because of the enhancements. If things were streamlined, then that means there's going to be a reduction of goals and objectives. If the program was consolidated, if multiple programs were consolidated in one major program, that means the goals and objectives are going to change. They're either going to be expanded or they're going to be reduced based on the streamlining of program and services. The objectives are going to change, and so the mission statement then needs to take into account the changes that occur across the whole entire program, and the outputs, the outcomes, the goals. On slide number 6, reallocation of inputs. Whenever there are significant program modifications, there are significant changes to the input allocation. Those allocations are either can be extensive or minor. If there are program consolidations, then there's going to be the resource allocation can either be expanded or it can be reduced depending on what occurred actually with the consolidation. If program and services are expanded, then that means there's going to be more resource allocation to those programs and services that were expanded. Obviously, when programs are expanded, then there's going to be an increase in financial inputs. There's going to be an increase in human capital, human resources, and there's going to be an increase in materials and supplies. Conversely, when the programs are shrunk, when the scope is reduced, then that should lead to significant reductions in financial inputs, significant reductions in human resources inputs, and significant reductions in materials and supplies. The financial reports that are produced subsequent to the modifications need to take into account all of those changes that occurred across the programs. So for those, like for example, the Covenant House. As I mentioned for the Covenant House, it appeared that the salary-related expenditures were distributed proportionally across other programs. As I mentioned, that is not the best way to report salary-related expenditures for the programs, because that means that the expenditure for some programs were over-reported, for some of the programs it could have been under-reported. So ideally, as the program modifications are implemented and they take effect, the resource allocation for those programs should be made as accurately as possible to take into account program changes. As those program changes occur, and as the financial human resources and supplies inputs are changed, then the financial report should have those changes in the cost actually reflect what actually occurred during and after the implementation. So that when you're conducting financial assessment, for example, if you're doing a vertical assessment by program, then those program costs are an actual reflection of the expenditures that actually were incurred after the program implementation. If you can also look at those, you can do a post before and after study in terms of how the cost of the program changed, how they changed after the implementation. You can compare it to before the implementation of the changes that occur, so you can assess the change, the decrease or increase and costs for based on the financial inputs, human resources inputs, and materials and supplies. So you can do a post comparison for resource allocation. But keep in mind that the new baseline is that indicator that's created after the implementation, because there's a new reality. The goals and objectives are actually changed, and as the goals and objectives and outputs change, then there's a new baseline that's established. On page number 7, slide number 7 of the presentation, there's the program and service modifications. Program and service modifications should be comprehensive. It looks at the policies, it looks at the practices, it looks at the processes that were changed. Those policies, practices, and processes are changed to hopefully enhance the effectiveness of the program and also to enhance the efficiency of the program for the service delivery. The goal of program assessment should be to make positive changes to the program so that it become more effective, more efficient, and meeting client needs. Policies are modified to incorporate program and service enhancements. If there's a consolidation of programs, then the policies need to change because you're expanding the program and service. If eligibility criteria have changed, then there needs to be policies that reflect that. If there are reporting changes that occur, then there needs to be policies that are going to affect the policies that need to take into account changes in the reporting. If there are new accounts, for example, new accounts for expenditures, new accounts for financial inputs, then the policies need to take into account those changes to the inputs and to the inputs in terms of finances, in terms of human capital. If practices were streamlined and eliminated, those need to be documented. Those also need to be archived. Processes that were modified and eliminated also need to be archived and documented so that you know exactly what happened, why it occurred, why the modifications were done to the practices and processes, but also, most importantly, were the processes implemented the way they were supposed to be implemented. Same with the practices. On slide number 8, we have the restatement of outputs and outcomes. The output statement should be revised to incorporate program and service enhancements. Once there are program and service enhancements, improvements, modifications, the outputs are going to change based on what is being delivered. The outputs are re-specified to reflect the changes in the inputs and to reflect changes in the program and services that are actually being delivered. The outputs also need to be re-specified to reflect changes in the target population and clients served. If there are going to be changes to the population and clients that are served due to the program modifications. Slide number 9. We have the restatement of outcomes. Outcomes need to be revised based to incorporate the changes to program and services. The outcomes need to be revised to reflect changes in inputs and program and service outputs. The outcomes need to be re-specified to reflect changes to the mission and the goal statements. As I mentioned, when programs are modified, that means that inputs are being modified, either increasing or decreasing. Programs either increasing or decreasing. That means the outputs are going to either increase or decrease. The outcomes are going to change based on the program modifications that were made. So the outcomes that were established for the program prior to the modifications are no longer germane, no longer pertinent, and no longer valid. And so those need to be changed. Those outcomes need to change as the mission statement changed, as the program and service change, how the program and service has been modified due to the findings and the recommendations of the assessment. When there are input and output changes, the effectiveness measures, the efficiency measures are going to change, especially when the population is either increased or decreased. That's going to affect the outputs in terms of clients served. That's going to affect the cost per service. That's going to affect all the other key performance indicators that were created for their program and service prior to the modification. So on slide number 10, we have the recalibration of KPIs. The key performance indicators are revised to reflect and incorporate the program and service enhancements. Again, as I mentioned, there are going to be changes to the inputs on the financial side, human capital side, and on supplies and materials. There is going to be changes to the program service, to the program and services, because the scope is either expanded or reduced. There may be changes to the number of people that are being served now, that's either going to increase or decrease. So those key performance indicators are going to change. New baselines need to be established for all the key performance indicators. Why? Because there are changes in resource allocation across the program and across the organization. So that means if we're going to conduct a financial assessment, financial condition assessment, those changes in the output allocation need to be accurate and valid in the financial reports, so that you recalibrate all those financial indicators so there's an accurate representation of the fiscal health of the organization. The same thing for effectiveness, efficiency, and quality KPIs. All those need to be recalibrated, re-specified when program changes occur. The mandate should need to be revised to reflect changes in the target population. So as programs are consolidated, for example, that means the population base has increased. As the population base has increased, that's going to put additional demands on the organization, so the demand for service is going to increase. Those need to be baselined and compared to before the implementation occurred, to assess how the expansion of the program increased demand of service. The demand of service also is going to affect, all the other indicators with respect to cost of service, because you're looking at, for example, population base that increased. What does that mean for cost of service? The cost of service increase or decrease based on the consolidation or the expansion of a program and service. If the cost of service decreased, was that a combination of the number of clients increasing, or was it also due to the financial resources that were modified for the program, if the program was expanded or if the program became more narrow? So there's a root cause as to why things are changing. You need to identify those and document those. Slide number 11, I have the case study. The case study is for the Office of Consumer Affairs. Again, all of the case study is based on the process improvement, the process-oriented assessment that I conducted with a colleague for the Office of Consumer Affairs. We did a program and service assessment. We provided recommendations, and based on those based on the recommendations, we made recommendations for program and service enhancements. Now, I suggest that you look at the, there's a sample case study that I have also for Public Administration course 5945. That includes the program and service assessments, recommendations, and program and service enhancements. That is a case study that was generated, two case studies that were generated for Public Administration, the capstone course, for which some of you are going to take. That capstone course is actually is a very innovative course that looks at the financial, that requires organizational theory, budget and finance, human resources management, and program assessment. So the things that you did in this class actually are going to help you when you get to the Public Administration 5945, which is a capstone class. So let me go to the, let me close this out, and let me go to the Consumer Affairs. And see they have the table of contents for the report. There's the executive summary. There's the introduction. Then there's the division of investigations and complaints, division of weights and measures, division of licensing, division of information and education. Each one has overview, functions, process maps, findings, recommendations, operation implications, and summary. As I mentioned, when I conduct assessments, I look at the entire organization. As you can tell from the table of contents, there's a cross-cut in organizational issues, so there are things that cut across the organization. So implementations that occur for one program actually have impacts for across all of the entire organization. It's not just, you're not just only affecting the program, affecting the entire organization. And so again, that's why I prefer doing comprehensive assessments, because changes that occur in one aspect of the organization can have drastic negative effects on other portions of the organization. And if it's going to affect other portions of the organization, it's going to affect the functions of that organization, it's going to affect the tasks and activities of the other components of the organization. So if you see the structure of the report is similar to the structure that I have for your assignments. So you have the executive summary, the scope, and the method, how the data was collected, you have the findings, you have the recommendation. Those recommendations included staff development, staffing, included recommendations for information technology and new government. It had financial and budgetary applications for training costs, for estimated new revenue, estimated costs for new positions, and then there's a summary. So the executive summary was written last, and it has all the components of the report. This is the report. We have the introduction, why the process was actually being, why we undertook the assessment. It has the scope of the assessment. It has the method, the data that was collected, why we collected the interviews, how we collected the data. And it has the summary. Here's the division of investigations and complaints. It has the Office of Consumer Affairs as one of 7 public safety, one of 7 agencies in the public safety vertical of New York, Nassau County. It has the functions and functions. The functions of the organization. It has the organizational chart, which we had to create because the organization itself did not have an organizational chart, so we created the organizational chart. Just very briefly, Tom Swanson, who was the county executive who hired me, is now the congressman. R.J. O'Malley, who was the chief deputy county executive for chief operating officer, is now one of the presidents of a major hospital in New York. Timothy Driscoll, I don't know what happened to him. Roger Boxter is no longer retired, no longer there. Steve Hansen is gone. The person who is now is the person who is now the commissioner of the organization is Madeline Farley, who was in charge of home improvement licensing. She's now the commissioner of the Office of some repairs. Right, those are all the process maps that I've covered. I'm going through the report to give you a sense of how everything came about. Again, these are all the process maps that we conducted. I'm going through it pretty quickly, so if you see it on the video, you know that I just scanned through them. Again, these are all based on all the process maps that we conducted. Yeah, all the findings. Yeah. You notice we have operational weaknesses. We also identified the strengths. And so for each component, each department, we have the recommendations of what they needed to do in order to make it more effective, more efficient, to streamline services. On page 27, you know, we recommended the acquisition of the enterprise IT solution for performance management and management. Acquire and install enterprise-wide IT solution for the relational databases. Acquire and install software for across all individual programs, personal computers, because those that don't occur. Automate the production and distribution of receipts. Obtain web-based applications for functionality to reduce mail correspondence. We identified operational applications, and the operational applications and the recommendations actually help to provide usher the program to program advancements. Again, this is, so if you look at page 28, we have the current software applications in OCA. We identified the individuals that have them, which ones didn't have them, and would they like it on the individual PCs. Yes, we looked at, you know, the approximate instruction, because we want to know how much time it would take to actually provide the cert to do professional development. So we did that. We identified all the training needs for the staff. So how many people were actually needed to be trained? We're going to have a training center, or we're going to be self-taught, and then the levels of proficiency. Was there a core level of proficiency in Adobe Acrobat on different types of software that they had, and then would they like instruction, yes or no? And so we did that. Yeah, we looked at, you know, all kinds of different applications. We also looked at operational costs. How much would it cost to train individuals? What was any opportunity for revenue enhancement? And what was the operational implications? So in this case, on page 30, it was a decrease in workload due to automation and streamlining. Again, there was supposed to be an improvement to the visual and organizational effectiveness due to enhanced processes and service delivery. There's supposed to be an improvement to the visual and organizational efficiency due to reducing multiple data entry. And you achieve programmatic goals and objectives and outcomes. Again, the reason for undertaking this assessment was to identify those weaknesses in the organization, and how are we going to then, given those weaknesses that occur in the organization, what recommendation can we provide in order to make the organization work more effective, more efficient. Right? And again, this is the basis for doing the program asset, doing the program modifications. I'm scanning through this program, to this report, and highlighting things that helped us, that informed us on what things need to be done to make the program modifications. On page 33, table I-1-5, there's a recommendation impact matrix that we did for the Division of Investigations and Complaints. For example, the recommendation to acquire enterprise IT solution for technology solution, for performance measurement, performance management, it's going to have a moderate to low impact increase. Going to have a moderate to low increase in workload. It's going to have a high increase in program effectiveness. It's going to have a high increase in improving efficiency. It's going to have high impact on attaining the outcomes. The added cost to the organization needed to be determined because we didn't know which IT solution was going to be procured, if it was going to be procured, and so we didn't know that. Right, there's a key for high, moderate, low impact decrease to be determined. So if we look at the acquisition of information technology with respect to the relational databases, workflow, and case management functionality, that's going to have a decrease in workload. The reason for that is that you're going to minimize the processing time associated with inputting data into databases and including collecting data and so forth. It's going to have a high impact on program effectiveness. It's going to have a high impact on efficiency and a high impact on outcomes. Again, the cost is to be determined. So when you acquire the software across, install software across all individual programs, it was going to have, we estimate to have a low impact on workload, a high impact on effectiveness, a high impact on efficiency, a high impact on outcomes, and a low overall low cost in terms of operational costs. So when you talk about automating the production and distribution of receipts, that's going to have a decrease in workload because that meant that there's going to be less time dedicated to actually producing manual receipts. A high impact on effectiveness, a high impact on efficiency, a high impact on outcomes. Web-based applications, again, we're supposed to reduce workload because individuals have the ability to then send their complaints to the Office of Consumer Affairs to the internet as opposed to sending in mails, mailing the form, coming in person, not necessarily wasting their time, but taking time off from their employment to come to the office and file the complaint. Also, it's going to reduce the workload of staff because they don't need to actually mail out the form, complete the form, mail it out to the person with the complaints. The estimate would have a high impact on effectiveness, high impact on efficiency, high impact on outcomes. All right, the streamlining of the revenue administration, as I mentioned, there's programs tend to affect other functions within the organization. So in this case, because fees were being assessed, it's going to have an impact on the revenue administration. So that was going to have a decrease on the workload of the revenue staff because that meant that things were not going to be entered manually into ledgers. It was going to be automated. There's going to be more automation to streamline the process. We would have a moderate impact on organizational effectiveness because the revenue administration function is not directly related to the service provision of the division. All what it did do was that it collects revenue, reports the revenue, and so it would have moderate effectiveness on the organization, have moderate effectiveness and efficiency of the division, and it would have a moderate impact on the outcomes. And it would have low cost to the division. And again, we're estimating how these recommendations are going to have an impact on the division, but also on the organization in terms of meeting its mission. So going through the whole process mapping activity help us to identify where workload will be impacted, how will it be impacted, will it be increased or decreased, how the program changes will then affect the organization, the effectiveness of the division, would it have a high, moderate, or low impact on efficiency? And would it help the organization obtain its outcomes? And we also added a component as to what the financial cost would be to the organization. In this case, this division. Right? We did the same thing for the division of weights and measures. We looked at the functions. What was the overview? We looked first at the overview of the division. What is it supposed to accomplish? Who is being managed? What are the functions? We did a process map for it. Based on the process map, we come up with the findings. Based on the findings, we identified the weaknesses. Here we have, in this case, for the division of weights and services, there was the human resources weaknesses. We looked at the current software applications in each division. Excuse me. We looked at the amount of training that was needed. We looked at the recommendations. We looked at, we provided recommendations rather. We looked at operational implications. And similar to what we did for the other division, for division for weights and measures, we looked at how the recommendation, how the solution was going to impact the workload, how it was going to impact effectiveness, efficiency, and outcomes. We also examined what costs would be incurred if there were going to be additional costs. If there were going to be additional costs, would be low, moderate, or we didn't know because we didn't have the information. So if we look at the matrix, we estimated where there's going to be moderate, low impact, where there's going to be a decrease in the workload, and whether there was going to be no impact. We looked at program effectiveness, were the recommendations, program changes going to improve the effectiveness of the organization, of the division. If they were going to improve the effectiveness, it was going to be high or moderate. We looked at efficiency, was efficiency going to be improved? If it was going to be improved, was it going to be high or moderate? Excuse me, give me a second. Let me go see the camera, make sure that the video is working. Now for the division of licensing, okay, this is all has to do with program improvement, modifying programs. Again, the reason why you undertake an assessment is to make program modifications to improve the service delivery to clients. In this case, we did a comprehensive process-oriented assessment for the Office of Consumer Affairs. We looked at every division. And we did so because we wanted to find out what were the cross-cutting issues for the whole entire organization. We looked at how each program impacts different functions of the organization. So each program, each division has an impact on the revenue side. Each division has an impact on the hearings that are performed. It also has impacts for external agencies such as the District Attorney's Office, the Attorney General's Office. So undertaking this process map consulting project for the Office of Consumer Affairs, help the commissioners and the staff understand what are they supposed to do, whether they're effective and efficient, what does it mean for the organization as in general, what does it mean for the mission, and given the findings and the recommendations, what impact would it have on the division and the organization as a whole. Again, here's the process map for the division. Here's the new application activity distribution. process map, the findings, looked at the weaknesses, we looked at the operational implications. And here we looked at compared to the other divisions, on page 60, we have the software training needed, and so we actually calculated all the training that was needed for year 1, year 2. We looked at the total cost. These are for 3 individuals that needed Excel, PowerPoint training, 1 individual that needed the internet training and Adobe. We looked at the cost. We looked at the total cost for year 2, and we looked at the total cost across 2 fiscal years. Here we also looked at, given that there was a deficiency in human resources, we asked that we propose a new position. This is going to be a part-time FTE. We have the fringe factor. The total fringe factor that included any type of benefits that they would get, he or she would get. And then we calculated the total cost. And then we also calculated the return on investment. So we looked at first revenue, we looked at first year revenue, and then net outcome revenue. So we looked at the net outcome would be $260,000, and that would be essentially the difference between the gross revenue minus the total HR cost. So we conducted revenue return on investment on the new person coming in, and so everything that you've done, that I've asked you to do in your assignments, I've done personally. And again, this incorporates things that I would ask you to do into this project. So we looked at program costs, we looked at return on investment in terms of human capital, and so we looked at what revenue this position would raise, and given the total revenue, subtract the person's the position's total HR cost would be the net revenue, and so if you divide, you know that there's a huge return on investment on this position if the position would be filled. And we have the implications. Yeah, so the recommendations for the Division of Licensing is that we acquire the IT solution. Excuse me. They have a moderate to low impact on increase in workload. In some cases you have a decrease. Most of the cases you have a decrease. Sometimes you have a low impact. If you looked at the program improvement and effectiveness, it would be moderate to high. In terms of efficiency, moderate to high. In terms of obtaining the outcomes, it would be moderate to high. The added cost would be low to undetermined because we didn't know the cost of acquiring the enterprise information technology solution. All right, this is the Division of Information and Education. We provided recommendations based on assessment. Again, we provided the cost for the training needs. As similar to the other division, we added new person. This is a net per FTE, so this is a individual that actually was going to be full-time, 33,000 plus the fringe factor for benefits. So the total cost of this individual would be 43,000. Total cost of the position would be 43,000. And then the revenue that the position was expected to generate was 125,000 or 126,000. The net revenue was going to be 82,000, rounded up to 83,000. So you can have a positive impact on revenue, and so that would have a positive return on investment. Position was filled. Again, given the recommendations, if the recommendations were to be implemented for the program improvement modifications, we here because what happened, the reason why we recommended a bilingual staff person was that Nassau County was going through a lot of demographic changes. There was an increase in the Hispanic population, a decrease in there was an increase in the Asian population, a decrease in the white population. The black population was staying normal. There was also changes in in terms of contractors. There was an increase in unlicensed landscaping contractors, an increase in home improvement contractors. So one thing that was needed by the organization, and I mentioned that as the population changes, the organization needs to then change and provide the resources necessary. And so one recommendation was to provide a bilingual staff person. And in this case, because there was an increase in the Hispanic population, we recommended that there would be an individual who was fluent in English and in Spanish. That was to make the organization more effective and efficient in serving the Hispanic population. It would have a moderate increase in the workload, have a high impact on effectiveness, high impact on efficiency, high impact on attaining goals, moderate impact on costs. Again, we recommended an IT, an enterprise-wide information technology solution. Have a moderate to low impact on workload, high impact on effectiveness, high impact on efficiency, high impact on outcomes. Again, if you look at some recommendations, we estimate they have a low impact, a decrease impact on workload. All of them will have a high impact on effectiveness. Other recommendations will have a high impact on effectiveness, efficiency, and on outcomes. And again, have a decrease to a moderate increase in workload. Okay. As I mentioned, program modification takes into effect after an assessment has been conducted. As I mentioned earlier, there are issues that cut across the organization. So when you impact one department or one program or service, is going to have a cascading effect across the organization. Other sections of the organization are going to be impacted. So as one program expands, another program is either going to be reduced, another program actually may decrease. That is going to affect the resource allocation across all the organizations. It's going to change the allocation of inputs across all the departments, all of the programs and services. It's going to impact the output and outcome of each additional of all of the program and services in the organization. And as I mentioned, it's a lot easier to do. It's not a lot easier. It's more beneficial to conduct a comprehensive assessment of the organization as opposed to looking at one program. The reason why I advocate and recommend doing an assessment of the entire organization is that it helps you identify all those issues that cut across the organization. So if you look at page 73 of the OCA report, Office of Consumer Affairs, and you look on the video, you will notice that there's a section of the page that's cost-cutting organizational issues. This chapter deals specifically with all those issues that cut across the whole entire organization. And as I mentioned, as you affect one section of the organization, you're going to affect the others. So in table 5.1, it's a matrix of how the application process, for example, affects weights and measures, but it doesn't affect the other sections. It shows how the complaint resolution function affects the division of investigations and complaints, weights and measures, licensing, and information and education. Data management affects the whole entire organization. Education may only affect two sections of the OCA. The hearings affected three divisions. Investigations affected four divisions. Revenue collection affected 4 divisions. So if you look at it, that was looking at it vertically. Looking at it, that was looking at it horizontally. How the processes affect, cut across the organization. If you look at it vertically, weights and measures is affected by almost every process. From processing applications to complaint resolutions to data management, hearings, inspections, investigations, licensing, revenue collection. Licensing is affected similarly by the processes. The administrative side is affected by data management, education, investigations, legislature, presentations, and revenue collection. Weights and measures and licensing, they're affected by most of the processes, but you can't just focus on them because again, those complaints affect multiple application process affects two divisions. If you look at the complaint resolution, that affects 4 divisions. So focusing just on weights and measures without focusing on the other two, you're going to create issues across the organization. Now, if you look at data management, you just can't focus on one division. You have to focus on all of the divisions because if you're going to change data management in one division, that's going to have impacts across the entire organization. If we're dealing, especially if we're dealing with IT solutions, if we implement just an IT solution for one division and not the other divisions, then you're going to have issues with sharing data, not just sharing data, but making sure that the data are well integrated. So you have to look at it in terms of comprehensively. And so when you do program modification, you need to look at all of the divisions, all the programs, and how all the processes that are in place cut across not just one particular program, but cut across the organization. On table 5.2, let me expand this. We looked at all the computer software that needs to be installed in each personal computer and workstation. So a total of 28 individuals will be affected. So if you look at it vertically, 28 individuals. If you look at it, horizontally, 28 individuals. Look at it vertically, that means that there's going to be different. Some individuals need training on particular types of software, and others need less type of training for different software. So you can identify those areas vertically which require the most training. You can look at the number of vertically, again looking at vertically, the number of PCs that actually need it. If you look at it vertically, you can look at the total number of hours that cut across all of the departments for the whole entire organization, and where is the Most training is needed, most training is needed for each application of current process organization. Again, all of this impacts program application. And we'll scroll down to the next page. Staff development and enrichment. Again, we're looking at program modifications. Then this takes into account staff development. In order to do program modification, you need staff development. You need to train them. You need to provide the skill set that they need in order to perform the new functions. So here on table 5.3, we have the vectors of organizational issues and solutions. So we have the function, we have the process, and we have the purpose, or the goal. Right? So the complaint, consumer complaint resolution process is to obtain information from consumers via standardized forms. That affects 3 divisions. We identify the weaknesses. These weaknesses then lead to the solution. Is it an IT solution, e-government solution, HR, or other? We looked at, again, looking at the same function with the data management. What was the purpose of the goal? How many divisions are affected? What are the weaknesses? And again, how do you solve it? Is it going to be IT, government, HR, or another process? So we looked at it for each function. We looked at the process. We looked at each division. We looked at all the weaknesses. And what's the best way to then solve the problem? Those are all the cross-cutting issues. Now, all of that, I'm going to scroll up. This. Because what I'm trying to find is the section where we have changes to the mission statement. I think it's way, excuse me, I'm sorry. There are changes that we made to the mission statement, to the goals. Oh yes, here it is. It's in the appendix. You have the agency vision. You have the agency vision. You have the agency mission. You have the core values. description of the agency and responsibility centers for each division. We have the organizational chart. You have programs and outcomes. As you can tell, we have things that deal with opportunities. Let me make this bigger. So here we have on page 89, we have the functions of the divisions of the organization. We have the functions across inspecting and testing, regulation, legislature, licensure, investigations, the fines and penalties, hearings, and dispute resolutions, security commissions, and so forth. Going vertically, we identify how each division is then affected by each function. We look at it vertically. We look at which for inspections and testing affects which division. So you look at both vertically and horizontally. The check mark says primary responsibility, and then we look at the other divisions as whether or not they provide support responsibility. Again, the reason why we're doing this is that once you start making program changes, it's going to affect other agencies, other divisions within the agency. If you're looking at programs and nonprofits, changes in the program are going to affect the other programs and services. It's going to have a direct effect and indirect effect. Here you notice that some divisions provide support services for other divisions. And so as changes are made within the primary responsibility center, it's going to impact other divisions. So if the program changes are occurring in the primary responsibility center without taking into account how it's going to affect the other divisions within the organization, you're going to affect the effectiveness and efficiency of the support services. That you're going to affect them in probably in the negative way as opposed to helping them, because you're making changes that aren't consistent with the processes that are in place. That cuts across all the other functions. Okay, so as we did a SWOT analysis. So what are the strengths? What are the weaknesses? What are the opportunities? And what are the threats? We did that for each division and their functions. In terms of program modifications, like I mentioned, we restate the goals and objectives. We restate the objectives to provide key performance indicators. Based on everything that we did for the Office of Consumer Affairs, for the Division of Investigations overall performance measures, for the functional investigations, we specify the goal was to reduce workload backlog. We have the specific objectives: decrease current workload case backlog by 25% per year, fill current investigator and clerical positions, fully automate investigation complaints response, decrease turnaround time, or decrease the processing time, reduce the processing time for initial complaint filing and complaint resolution. We provided key performance indicators, KPIs, or performance measures. Current number of complaints filed per year, number of requests received by OCA for investigation, so the demand measures. We have percent decrease in workload, case backlog per year, that's effectiveness. Actual percent decrease in targeted annual vacancy rates, that's effectiveness. We looked at, for example, the percent of customer satisfaction rate reported by complaint response resolution, that is quality. Improved complaint response resolution process, we looked at it as an outcome measure. At the acquisition of state-of-the-art technology. Our goal was to fully automate investigations. We also linked it to the previous goal of reducing the backlog. All right, so we have key performance indicators. All right, we have the total work hours dedicated to developing the MP efficiency. That's the efficiency measure, dollar to dollar ratio, recommended budget provided per annum compared to budget request per year. That's efficiency. And we have workload hours dedicated to OCA staffing, ensuring website developers meet phase execution. We looked at efficiency. So we looked at efficiency, demand measures, effectiveness measures for each function based on